Well, this is a special treat. We got Alex. It was a coffee and a column with a, what should we call this, Dave? Coffee and a column with a side of Krainer.
Right, right, right.
This is the first time you guys have been on a podcast together?
Well, not sort of informally. We're in a Zoom group together, and so we've both spoken to the Zoom group. I miss some of the Zoom calls. 2.5 hour a week Zoom calls is a lot of drain out of my brain. So
Yeah.
so I try to go to the ones that I really care about. But it's been a great Zoom group. This is, I remember the first day I went, it was Bobby Kennedy. We had Senator Johnson, we had MEPs from Britain, we had about a week ago we had Steve Bannon. And so it seems to me it must be Jerome Corsi who's able to round these guys up. Do you sense that's where this talent's coming from? That Corsi makes phone calls?
I'm sure, but also Doug Casey. I've done a few. I brought Larry Johnson. There's a few people in that group who have a good Rolodex.
Chops. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's been a steady stream of talent through the Zoom group, and we had some libertarian presidential candidate at one point who I can't remember his name to give you an idea how unimportant he was, and I was driven a little nuts when Bannon was there, and it was about a week before Trump was really going to start doing stuff, and you know how everyone likes to thinks it's important for them to tell the guest what the guest ought to know. And I go, you got Steve Bannon. Why don't you ask him questions, right? Because he knows what's going on. And people would not ask him questions. I go, I would love to know what Steve Bannon thinks about various things. And somehow you keep telling him what you think about things. And so in any event, I don't know.
Well, and you had said that, how do I become one of these cool kids and get on these Zoom calls?
I don't know. I got invited by Teresa, the sort of butch cut physicist. Teresa, Alex. She's the one who talks about magnetic pole shifts and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah, she's the one who sort of invited me over to the call. It shifted a lot. It started out as pure COVID. It was all COVID.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. My apologies. I mixed that group with a different group. That case is not in that group. That's a different group.
I didn't think so. I was just shutting my mouth.
Sorry, my bad.
So,
Right.
so to fill me in, because I wasn't on the call when Alex was talking about. Well, here, Dave, you were on it. What were some of the questions? What was Alex talking about? And
so what Alex talked about, and I've written about Ukraine every year, and the year that Russia invaded, I did as deep a dive as I could do, and concluded that Putin was not the problem, just period. Putin was playing his best hand, and that NATO squeezed him, and he had to move. And Alex, in a pretty recent Zoom call, started talking about something I didn't know anything about, and that is that NATO had approached Ukraine, a dozen years ago, if not more, and said,
yeah.
we'd like you to be in NATO, but here's what you got to do. And as I recall, they were basically going to abuse NATO like there was no tomorrow. It was a terrible deal. And Putin basically said, I wouldn't make you do that, right? So I was kind of hoping you could sort of rehash that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
So I'll go over my notes so I don't get lost in the. Basically, there's a. So what I mentioned is that I've been working on the book about this for about 2 years, and the reason why I have some of this material is because I have a habit of copy pasting. Like if I come across an article that I think is important, I copy paste the whole thing and I save it locally. And so I've been doing that when the events were hotting up in 2013, 2014.
Right.
And now when I started working on this, I discovered that a lot of those articles just vanished completely off the internet. And I've been able to find some of them on the archive.today, archive.org, and so on. But some of them are gone completely. There's no
Right.
trace of them anywhere. But anyway, you know, like I have them. And so I wanted to reconstruct the gestation of that war in a timeline that makes sense. So
Right.
basically, as background, you know, NATO has been in existence since 1949, and this was only less than 4 years since the end of World War II. Russia and, I mean, Soviet Union and the Western world were supposedly allies, but in 1946, Winston Churchill gave his famous Fulton speech in the presence of Harry Truman and declared that the Soviet Union is an enemy of the West. And then, boom, 3 years later, they formed NATO, 12 member nations. Then in 1952, they add Greece and Turkey. And then in 1955, they add Western Germany. And only at that point, the Soviet Union reacts and creates the Warsaw Pact. So for the next 40 years, you have two blocks, but with the large buffer zone in between. The whole, you know, Eastern European nations were a buffer between the West and the Soviet Union. And then in 1991, Soviet Union implodes, but instead of declaring victory and disbanding, the NATO stays intact. And then in 5 subsequent waves of expansion, they move 1,600 kilometers eastwards. And with the exception of Belarus today,
So is that, let me ask you this, that started with Clinton in 97? That's when we started moving NATO east?
yes, correct.
Right. Okay.
And so they're leaning completely on the western borders of Russia today, almost
Right.
with the exception of Belarus, but they have been trying very hard to regime change Belarus, and then, you know, they would completely be on the border of Russia. And that's a very serious security threat for Russia, which has been at the receiving end of invasions from the West for the past something like 400 years. Okay.
Always via Ukraine, interestingly, right? It seems to always be via Ukraine. Ukraine's like this funnel point.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Napoleon and Hitler.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. And so again, Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and almost immediately NATO goes in and starts to have a cooperation informally with Ukraine. And in 1997, they sign a distinctive partnership of something. Anyway, it's a document that formalizes a partnership between Ukraine and NATO. It's signed in 1997 in Madrid. It's called. I'm looking at my notes. I can't. My eyes are not finding it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So anyway, what happens next is
Is
that.
that the Minsk agreement? Am I thinking the
Oh,
Minsk?
no. Minsk agreement comes
Okay.
in 2014, 2015.
That's what I thought, but I thought maybe
So
I was wrong.
1997 is just a partnership agreement signed between NATO and Ukraine. And so
Now, we had promised Russia verbally that we would not do this, right? So James Baker and guys like that had said, you know, we will not move NATO east if you don't move the Warsaw Pact west. And
yes,
then we stuck it up their ass right away.
no, yeah, that's true, but it gets a lot worse than that. So here's the situation in 2014. A quote from the late Stephen Cohen. NATO has decided to quadruple its military forces on Russia's border or near Russia's borders. The last time there was this kind of Western hostile military force on Russia's borders was when Nazis invaded Russia in 1941. There has never been anything like this. During the 40-year Cold War, there was this vast buffer zone that ran from the Soviet borders all the way to Berlin. Okay, and so what Cohen is describing there in reality looked like this. So first, the United States built anti-ballistic missiles in Romania and Poland, deployed nuclear-capable aircraft close to Russia, and allocated $8 billion of US taxpayer money to upgrade their arsenal of B-61 nuclear bombs, stockpiled in the United States and 5 other NATO member nations. These deployments were accompanied with increasingly provocative behavior. NATO forces have been conducting as many as 40 major military exercises per year in Russia's immediate neighborhood. Movement of their military assets in the vicinity of Russia's borders went from purely reconnaissance hardware to battle-ready ships and aircraft equipped with precision munitions and missiles, which often approach Russian territory to as close as 15 kilometers or 9 miles. On these occasions, they often activate their missiles in repeated mock attacks on Russian targets. In September 2020, Chief of Operations of Russia's High Command, General Sergei Rudskoy, stated that NATO was staging between 33 and 40 such flight approaches per week, using fighter jets from Sweden, Germany, Ukraine, and Italy. In 21, Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General at that time, boasted that perhaps the most important thing that we have done is that for the first time in NATO's history, we have combat-ready troops in eastern part of the alliance. New battle groups are deployed to the Baltic countries and Poland. We have tripled the size of NATO readiness force, and so on and so forth. They were not only targeting Russia as in Russian territory, they were also explicitly targeting Russian population in former Soviet republics like Latvia. So in 2018, in August, they conducted the largest military exercises in Latvia's history, mobilizing some 10,000 troops from the Latvian Armed Forces, National Guard, and law enforcement, as well as personnel from US, Canada, Spain, Italy, Poland, and other Baltic states. Part of the drills included the deployment of troops to counter unrest in the towns of Valmiera and Jekabpils, both of which are populated by a Russian ethnic majority. And so this has been going on all the way up to the special military operation in Ukraine. And it's actually still going on. The NATO is still regularly conducting military exercises close to Russia's borders, still simulating invasions. They actually maybe still run something called joint forcible entry, which are kinds of exercises that foresee breaking through Russia's borders and invading. And there have been plans which have actually triggered Russia's intervention in Ukraine, plans to use nuclear weapons and to launch a preemptive first strike nuclear attack on Russia, to strike their command centers and their nuclear retaliation facilities. And in the space that they, let's say, weaken Russia's ability to mount defensive movements, to launch a land invasion through Ukraine, Baltic states, and Poland. And so they were either it's like this: either they were actually preparing to do this, or they absolutely wanted to convince the Russians that this is what they're planning to do, because the objective of the game is to provoke Russian intervention. And then what took the cake is that they were planning to install anti-ballistic missile sites in Ukraine in the vicinity of Kiev and Chernobyl. No, sorry, Kursk. No, Where was Gonzalo Lira? What was that city?
I don't know, but I remember watching him the whole way, and then he's tweeting about how he's escaping Ukraine, and then he got captured and killed. And I'm thinking you should have shut up on the whole Twitter thing.
Did you guys know
Yeah.
his? Did you know his last interview was with me?
No,
No.
are you
Yeah,
serious?
I swear to God.
I didn't know.
Really?
Yeah.
And you don't
I did
remember the
not know
city he
that.
was living in?
No, you know what? Yeah, I interviewed with he was
It's
on
not
my
Kramatorsk. It's not Kursk. It's
Did he not believe he would be killed?
No, I never sent you the interview. See, my show this was May of
No,
20.
Mike, you let me down.
I'll send
buddy.
I'll send it to both of you if you want to hear it. It's 2 hours.
Well, the other one
We
that
reported Saturday.
I want to do is watch the Diana West interview we did, which I think he'd find entertaining.
Yeah.
Send Alex that one because that was a great interview.
But no, Gonzalo was Saturday
yeah.
morning, and then he was arrested Monday morning. I published the episode, and I was surprised because I was like, "Oh, he's not retweeting it," and he was arrested.
Yeah, he should have shut up.
Yeah. Sorry, we went off track there
But
for
anyway,
a second.
so they were planning to install these missile launch facilities to where they would be within 5 minutes of striking Moscow. And so
Which is
minutes.
just not acceptable. It's just completely absurd. It's completely
Yeah, because
absurd.
that would amount to a strategic defeat for Russia because it would not give them enough time to mount a retaliatory strike.
Right.
So that was extremely important. And then they also had a secret program for Ukraine to develop nuclear weapons, and they were deliberately in 2 centers. One of them was Chernobyl because the radiation from the nuclear power plant could mask the radiation
So they
from
could
the-
hide the existence of the nuclear weapons
Yes.
behind the
And
background noise.
but not only did the Russians know this, they actually wanted the Russians to know it. And then at the very last minute, there was this back and forth between Putin and Blinken and Biden, where Putin in December 21 calls Blinken out of the blue, cold call, and he tells him, "Yeah, this is a problem. We need to know that you will not be doing this, that you will not be launching a missile launch sites in Ukraine." And Biden told him, "Yeah, you have my word. We won't do that." And then the Russians were very relieved. But then when they started the Geneva talks, then when in December Russians also sent the 2 draft treaties, one to NATO, one to the United States, and they started the talks in Geneva about that. And then the U.S. delegations in Geneva said, "We don't know anything about this. We don't know what Biden told you, but we have no instructions of this." And then there were again calls between Lavrov and Blinken, in which Blinken said, "Nope, we cannot give you any such commitment. We reserve the rights to deploy missiles on the Ukraine's territory. We are prepared only to discuss with you a maximum number of missiles that we might deploy." And then there was another attempt, I think, through January, and it was a meeting, I think, between Putin, Lavrov, Blinken, and Biden, in which
Boy, there's an imbalanced pair.
yeah,
2 on 2.
I know.
Holy shit! Lavrov
But
and Putin
basically-
against Blinken and Biden. Holy
Yeah.
moly.
But basically, Blinken and Biden told them, "We do what you want. It's not we will do what we want. It's none of your business. We will not give you any kind of a commitment."
Which is,
and at that
which
point,
is false.
and then at the Munich Security Conference, Zelensky went and ran his mouth about Ukraine getting nuclear weapons.
He
And
did that
then-
yesterday, by the way, again.
Did he again? Yeah, I think. Well,
Yeah.
but by this point, it's not credible. Back then,
Right.
it was credible, and there was definitely, I read a lot of this correspondence and statements and everything, and it's very clear that the U.S. NATO side actually wanted the Russians to think that there was a credible nuclear threat, that they were preparing a preemptive nuclear attack. They were running repeated simulations of this at the Pentagon.
So is that to get Russia to then accept the role of appearing to be the aggressor? Was that the idea, to get Russia to respond?
That's right. That's
so
right.
that then they can say, "Oh,
because
look
you
at
have
those
to get them to
dastardly
attack.
Ruskies!" Right.
You have to get them to attack, and then you can say, well, look, they're breaking the international law. They're
Unprovoked,
the
unprovoked, unprovoked.
Unprovoked invasion, brutal aggression, blah blah blah, all of that. Anyway, Russians understood this, but they had to intervene anyway.
Well, they were killing ethnic Russians in the east. They were ramping it up, so they were killing tens of thousands.
In February of 2022, according to OECD data, because there were OECD monitors there, they increased the frequency and number of missile attacks and shellings by 30-fold. 30-fold.
Wow.
Yeah, so they absolutely signaled to Russia, we're doing this. And then, the Russians, even then, they sent practically an expeditionary force because they wanted to force Ukrainians to back down and to negotiate. And that's when the negotiations started immediately, where they nearly signed a peace agreement with through Turkish and Israeli intermediation. And then Boris Johnson parachutes into Kiev and says, no, you fight the war. We're backing you 100%. Don't sign any truce. Don't sign any peace agreement. We'll win this one by force.
So what did we want, do you think? What were we looking for? What's our goal? Resources?
The ultimate
destruction
goal
of Russia?
Well, what's always the ultimate goal, and it's been true since the times of the British Empire, is to preserve hegemony over the whole Eurasian landmass.
Right.
And as we discussed the other day, Halford Mackinder already explicitly formulated that agenda and said that we must preempt the rise of a land-based empire, because Britain was a maritime empire, and the imperial cabal there perceived weakness in that, and they predicted that somewhere in the region of Eurasia, in the central regions, which Mackinder called the pivot area, the conditions were ideal for a land-based empire to emerge. And because the resource wealth in that area is so great, that this empire would give rise to a completely independent economic world to emerge, which would then eclipse the maritime empire and would become much stronger. So to preempt that, Mackinder proposed to surround this pivot area along its whole western and southern extent. So we're talking from the Baltics down to the Eastern Mediterranean, and then all across to the Koreas, with these beachheads, with the idea that regional forces, like at the time in 1904, Mackinder was talking about France, Italy, Egypt, India, and Korea. But since then, geography has changed, geopolitics, everything has changed. So, now we have also Ukraine, we have Israel there, which didn't used to exist back then. And we have all these flashpoints because, we have these unnatural divisions, Sykes-Picot. India has been partitioned between Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. Then you have Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Greece, North Korea, South Korea, China, India. And then, using this secret diplomacy that the Brits have perfected and refined over the centuries, and secret intelligence services, you cultivate terror groups, separatist groups, non-governmental organizations, and you you infiltrate the governments of all these powers, and you kind of set them at war against one another. And so that you always prevent a regional power from emerging, like Iran, like China, like India,
Right.
and you also continuously try to destabilize Russia with the ultimate view of partitioning Russia, because they were on their way to achieving that while Yeltsin was in power. And then it all got reversed on them when Putin took over, which is why they hate him so much.
So they want to cut Russia in half or into more pieces than that?
Depending on who you ask, they want to cut Russia into 5 pieces or 27 or
So there'd
so.
be 5 sovereign independent states.
Yeah, that's right. And
Okay.
they call this decolonizing Russia, and then they would like for Russia to be some kind of a small landlocked political entity. Well, landlocked, at least no access to the warm waters. So,
Right.
and then then you can pit one republic against the other, keep them at war, keep them always dependent on Western financiers for loans, for Western corporations to supply them weapons. And so they're always in debt to you. And you say, okay, fine, look, we'll help you fight uh, these bad guys at your doorstep, but we would like for you to open your, I don't know, agricultural lands to Monsanto, to Bayer, to
Right.
GM crops. Would like our corporations to exploit your oil or bauxite or iron ore or coal or whatever. And so that's been the name of the game for 20 years. Oh, sorry, for 200 years by the British Empire, and for longer mm, by collective Western, colonizing nations, which were Spain and France and Portugal and Belgium and Netherlands and Germany and Italy. And these were the techniques that they employed. So, now that actually Mackinder's worst nightmare came to pass, because they actually said they have to prevent Russia from rising to strength, but they have to especially prevent the collusion between, Mackinder was talking Russia and Germany, because they didn't see the possibility of Russia and China, which is now even worse for them. But this actually happened now. And not only that, now you have collusion between Russia, China, and Iran. And I think that in fullness of time, you're going to have collusion of Russia, China, Iran, and Germany. And, that's pretty much game over for the Western Empire.
So someone said that the U.S.'s worst nightmare is a Russia, Germany, Iran alliance. So someone prominent
Yes.
said that. Yeah.
Not
Yes,
China, Dave?
they
Not China and all that?
No. It
No,
was those
because
3. It was those
you
3.
see, in the olden days, they didn't think that China was even capable of rising anymore as a credible power. So they were not worried about China, and they have worked so diligently at making sure that China and Russia are on hostile terms and that there's no trust between them, that they, well into the 2000s, maybe as recently as 2012, 2014, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, they were talking like there's no way, no how will Russia and China ever become close allies. So don't even worry about that one. But the reason why they were primarily worried about China and Germany and Russia and Iran becoming allied, or at least becoming close trade partners, is because they perceived that the Germans, being Westerners, had world's leading technologies,
Mhm.
and then Russians and Iranians having plenty of resources, especially energy resources. And so they thought, German brains and Russian and Iranian um, resources could make them codependent and strong enough to resist the diktat of the Anglo-American empire. But they didn't see Russia or China becoming leaders in technology. Because obviously these are inferior races. They're not capable of abstract thoughts. They mostly, eat, sleep, fornicate, and grunt. And they respond.
That sounds pretty good to me. You're selling it now.
Yeah, they mostly respond to stimuli, while Western men can plan ahead. And
Yeah.
but today, what happens today is there's this institute in Australia, which I forget exactly. It's ASPI, and they tracked for over a period of 20 years on the basis of patent filings, market reach, peer-reviewed papers published, and so on. They tracked and ranked leading nations of the world, according to 64 different key technologies, right? And in 2007, the United States was the world leader in 60 out of 64 key technologies. China was a leader in only 3 of them. Today, so 18 years later, China is the leader in 57 of them, and the United States in only 7. So there's been a complete inversion. So that goes to okay, yeah. Some people say that they all stole it from us. They stole all of it from us, which explains why they would be in the lead, even though they're genetically incapable of planning ahead and developing their own
The
technologies.
absurdity of saying China doesn't plan ahead. China has, my understanding, it has an unbelievably long time horizon in their thinking, right? Mao had a 100-year plan. Show me, I don't see Nancy Pelosi's 100-year plan.
No, in the West we plan quarterly until the next
Right,
till the next earnings report.
right.
But this weird racism in the West is so profound that they go out of their way to convince themselves that that we are superior. And in 2014, Harvard Business Review actually published a peer-reviewed paper. Well, I don't know if it was peer-reviewed paper. It was an article, definitely, titled "Why China Can't Innovate." So they convinced themselves that for a variety of reasons, the
Well,
Chinese
when I
can't
was a
innovate.
kid, they would say the same thing about Japan. So
Yeah,
anytime you have an emerging market, so the U.S. in 1870, right? The Japan 1945. You start out making trinkets and shit like that, and then they say they're not innovators, and then next thing you know, Sony is now a huge company, and 14 of the 20 biggest companies in the world were Japanese by the 89 bust. And
yeah.
so we always somehow convince ourselves that these rising economic powers can't innovate. That seems to be a standard delusion.
Yeah, that our advantage is unassailable.
Right.
And so nothing to worry about. Carry on, keep spending. And in the United States, and I'm saying United States because the rest of the West is barely worth even mentioning.
I know.
There's this idea that everything works out if you spend enough money. So when they want to build this large AI infrastructure, they throw 500 billion at it. When they go and decide to start developing high speed rail networks, they start throwing hundreds of billions on it. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't yield anything at all, so long as we spend a lot of money. Same with the military-industrial complex. It eclipses practically the whole world, rest of the world combined. It's that big, and it still is lagging behind Russia and China. And then you have the U.S. health system, which is almost a fifth of the GDP. It's the amount of money that it gobbles up is absolutely astonishing, but it gives you the worst outcomes of any developed nation in the world.
Well, I've made the argument that healthcare also is not really GDP, to the extent that it's like having a 15-year-old Chevy that you're trying to keep on the road, and it's always in the shop because it's a 15-year-old Chevy, and that's not GDP. That is the cost of a rapidly depreciating asset, which I would say the boomers are. Well, so we've got this huge healthcare cost. It's not about product. It's a tax on the system.
You're absolutely right, but they calculate the GDP as though that was legitimate product. The way they calculate GDP, if you and I dug holes in front of each other's backyards and then filled them back up again and invoiced each other for that, that would count as GDP.
They actually, when they calculate GDP, they actually they assume you mow your own lawn, and that goes into the GDP. Things like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's insane.
Well, and then the
inflation anyway. But
the inflation corrections are nuts. I mean, the OER and things like that. The fact that they 27% of the CPI, which determines the GDP, is OER, which is basically a survey in which they ask people how much could you rent your house for, and since no one has a clue, you can play around with that number a lot. I wouldn't be shocked if we've been in a recession for a decade. I wouldn't be shocked if our economy was shrinking for a decade.
It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. The numbers are they're not biased. They're not exaggerated. They're outright fraudulent.
That's right. The Boskin Commission.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I know.
Let me ask you guys something in relation to what Alex just talked about, because I have actually Martin Armstrong's coming back on tomorrow, and one of the things that he's said throughout our conversations is how the neocons, want a war with Russia. So as Trump is now, starting his, it feels like he's been in office for 6 months, and what is he?
I know.
2 weeks
3
now,
weeks,
starting the third week.
God.
Yeah. As the conversations continue with Putin to work through some type of ceasefire agreement to stop this conflict in Ukraine, what could they do to counter it, or is there nothing at this point they can do to stop that?
I don't think they can counter it because, for one thing, I think Trump has one goal, and that is to stop the war quickly, because that's what he promised. So I don't think Trump actually cares where the borders are drawn in some faraway country. And so I don't think he cares if Russia says, look, we're taking the northeastern regions of Ukraine down to the whatever. I think Trump just wants to ink a deal. So I think he's going to say to Putin, he might pretend to be tough, but I think he'll say, what do you want? Let's make a deal. And Putin can get what he wants, I think. I think Putin's in the driver's seat here because Trump wants a quick solution. Because he promised a quick solution. He loves quick solutions. So Putin's going to say, here's what I want, and Trump will say, okay, and then he'll declare victory.
Regards to Zelensky then, because Putin looks at him, I just had Gilbert Doctorow on here about an hour ago. We were talking about some of this. Zelensky is, he's not a legitimate president. So will they have to remove him?
Yes.
Before Putin would be able to negotiate some type of ceasefire?
There was rumor that Zelensky was viewed as a guy that Russia could negotiate with. And so there were guys out there saying that they thought that Russia had an extraction team that could get Zelensky out of Kyiv in the event of a problem, get him to safety, if, for example, the Azov battalion, the Nazis, try to knock him off, that the Russians would get Zelensky out of there and he'd be able to cut a deal. But then Zelensky just became such a pawn of NATO and just would not act autonomously at all. Is that right, Alex?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think that Zelensky is controlled by the Brits, and I think that the British agenda is what determines what gets done, what doesn't get done, and I think that the United States only executes on that agenda. And so now, we've seen that when there was a fear that Donald Trump is going to win the elections, that the Brits went overboard to try to prevent it, even to the point of sending 100 labor activists to campaign for Harris. And the point why that's relevant is that if the U.S. administration stops implementing the British agenda, then the whole agenda breaks apart. And I think that Zelensky there is inconsequential. What I think is, well, if I were sitting in the Kremlin, I would ideally like to extricate Zelensky from there, because he's the man who knows a lot. And my impression, based on events, it wasn't stated explicitly anywhere. It wasn't stated in any form anywhere. But my impression is that the Russians have been cultivating General Zaluzhny for a long time, and that if General Zaluzhny becomes new president of Ukraine, that then Russia is going to have their own man in Kiev. No, this would shock people, but very strange events happened when there was an invasion of Ukrainian forces into Novgorod, I think. Anyway, it was one of those first Ukrainian incursions into Russia proper. And then we got a bunch of still images from that, from inside Russia. And they look staged as hell.
Oh, remember the one where they supposedly hit the Kremlin? There were a couple of guys on the roof of the Kremlin. So something hit the Kremlin's roof, and there were a couple of guys on a ladder. It looked like a firework. It looked like a Roman candle or something hitting the roof of the Kremlin. Maybe. And they tried to make it seem like that Zelensky had hit the Kremlin. I'm going, no, that was a bottle rocket.
Yeah.
And
so there's a lot of stuff going on that isn't, that seems like a psyop. And I thought that because this incursions into Russia coincided with Zaluzhny vanishing for about 2 weeks. He didn't turn up at a meeting with NATO that he was supposed to turn up. And then there was talk about him having resigned. And then there was a talk about him having gone back to the military academy to teach. And then he surfaced somewhere at supposedly some how do you call it? Some occasion, some celebration of something. And then he gave some interview. And then the Ukrainians wouldn't say, where is Zaluzhny? What's the deal with Zaluzhny? And then after about 2 weeks, he suddenly reappears and he's in charge of the troops, as though nothing happened. So I thought that is too weird. Something happened, and my suspicion was that he was in that incursion into Novgorod. Maybe it wasn't. No, I forget. What is the town in Russia that they keep bombing there? The one right next to the border.
Not Odessa.
No.
Not
Northeast.
Northeast. Northeast. I don't know.
Okay, it doesn't matter.
Americans are not very good at European geography. Let me point that out.
No, but it's not geography. It's just the name. It's just a
Yeah.
word of the town. But and it's in the news all the time because they keep the Ukrainians keep bombing it every so often. But now it escapes me. It doesn't matter. There was that which looked very weird, and
Is it
the
Poltava,
still photograph.
Alex? Poltava?
No, it wasn't Poltava. But anyway, the still images didn't make sense at all because all the Ukrainian equipment looked pristine. They it's anyway. I thought that Zaluzhny may have been part of that incursion, that he stayed some days in Russia, that he talked with the Russian leadership, and that they somehow returned him back to the front, and now he's in London.
Let me ask you this. Do you think Prigozhin really turned against Putin, which I find difficult to imagine?
No.
I think the NATO took out Prigozhin, right?
Maybe. I think that was a psyop. I don't think he turned against Putin. I think the whole
I don't
thing
either.
psyop.
They had body English guys watching Prigozhin talking to someone else, Lavrov or someone, and the body English guy said, "There's no tension here. These guys are not stressed.
Yeah,
they're having a pleasant conversation."
No, Prigozhin, what people might not remember, but Prigozhin used to be called Putin's waiter because Prigozhin was working at the Kremlin and he was serving food when Putin had, how do you call it, dignitaries from other, he was part of the service there. And I think that, to go from there to
running an army,
running a multi-billion-dollar mercenary organization,
right?
You have to probably earn absolute trust.
Right.
It means that they've vetted the crap out of you, and not only that, they probably have a couple of insurance policies that if you.
Well, the other thing is going against Putin is suicidal.
Yeah.
So the idea, one of the theories was, as Prigozhin was said to be heading to go after Putin, his troops actually were being moved closer and closer to Kyiv, and there was a theory that they were actually using his, and that the West laid off because the claim was he was going to get Putin, but in fact that his troops were being positioned better relative to Kyiv.
Maybe, yeah. I think that's entirely possible. The idea that he turned Wagner against the Kremlin, against Moscow, that is
unlikely.
So completely ridiculous. It's like for children. And I wouldn't discount the possibility that Prigozhin was disappeared, that he's alive, that he fake died, that he earned his retirement somewhere, and he's enjoying his life in anonymity somewhere.
Some DACA somewhere.
Russians have these facilities for former dignitaries and presidents and high-level party officials that are completely closed off to the public. Where they have it's like luxury hotels with hunting grounds, with tennis courts and golf courts and whatever, where they live in complete careless luxury.
Right.
And that's for example how Yeltsin ended his days. He lived in a place like this. Yanukovych, while he was for a period of time before he became president again in 2011-12, he spent a few years in Russia in one of these. So I wouldn't be surprised if Prigozhin isn't, somewhere like that, a Russian version of what do you call it? Not Camp David, but one of those places that is.
He's probably sharing a spot with Epstein or something.
Or Assad.
Yeah.
Assad.
Or Assad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible. They're playing cards there, and with Ken Lay as well. Ken Lay is a bit old.
I think he died.
He'll be a bit old.
I
He'll
think
just.
he supposedly died.
So,
Um, yeah,
do you guys do you anticipate then a resolution here in short order with Trump and Putin? Or,
I do. I think Trump wants it more than anything.
And no, but I think that there might be like a grand deal,
Right.
you know, and that if because here's the funny thing.
So does the part of Ukraine that Putin wants, does it stay as a Ukrainian independent province, or does it just get absorbed into Russia?
Oh no, it's already part of Russia.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
they already declared that it's part of Russia. So
Okay. Okay.
whatever part of Donbas Ukrainians still control, they consider it occupied territory. And
Okay.
but the funny thing is, Trump has been talking about Greenland and Canada and Panama and all this, and he has big ambitions, and none of them involve Ukraine or Eastern Europe. And at the same time, the Russians, it's not about territory, it's about national security. So
Right.
it's not how much territory is going to take, it's making sure that whatever is left of Ukraine is still never a part of NATO, that it remains demilitarized and neutral.
That's
And
what
so,
people didn't seem to understand, was that Putin was not trying to take Ukraine. He had to prevent NATO from taking Ukraine.
yeah, exactly.
And people didn't understand that. And I go, the Mexican analogy, right? If Putin moved troops into Mexico, we'd turn it into a sheet of glass real fast.
Right, right. Yeah, well, people didn't get it because all the Western media are working overtime to make sure
Bunch of
that people don't.
liars.
Yeah, they want to make sure that people don't get it, because the whole hope of West getting involved collectively in a war against Russia is to completely mislead people, that they misunderstand the situation, and that they think that we're fighting a new Hitler again, and that we have to do what was done in World War II.
Well, they've created several Hitlers, including Trump himself. There's so many things happening in the world that feel like that we almost have no chance of understanding them. That from our perspective, Walter Kern said it one day. He said, if you're watching what's going on in the world of geopolitics, he said, if you think you understand, you're dreaming.
Yeah,
And
I agree. I think that it's extremely important to try to read between the lines and use our imaginations, because very often they will not spell out for us what they're trying to do. So you have to wonder, what are they trying to do? And you have to try to make sense of events and why they might be unfolding. And I think that the grand bargain between Putin and Trump, and Putin was alluding to this. He wasn't alluding to the bargain, but he did say, after Trump gave his interview saying how he liked the Russian people, and how, on May 9th, he's going to give them a gift and do them a big favor, and then Putin gave a statement in an interview after that, and he said, that's very nice, it's good that President Trump likes us, and we should be friends, but we should discuss bigger things, in the sense of saying it's not just Ukraine. We should discuss bigger things. And I wonder what those bigger things are. And I wonder if it isn't a different version of the three block world, because the Brits have been obsessed for over a century.
Give us the three blocks. Give us the three blocks.
Yeah, so the three blocks in British vision, this is why the trilateral commission is called trilateral. It's the obsession with the three block world, where the British Empire saw themselves as running the Western North Atlantic part in cooperation, in partnership with the United States, and then running, Central and Eastern Europe in partnership with Germany, and then controlling the East Asia part in partnership with Japan. So those were the three big blocks, and they were working on that three block world, and Lord Halifax actually briefed the German Nazis about that, as that's the agenda behind World War II. They wanted to set up Germany as the hegemon in Central and Eastern Europe, and that would take care of that bloc. They already had Japan under control. They already had the United States under control. So that was their idea. But, you know, so there is, it does make some coherent sense, that three-block architecture. And I wonder if between Russia, China, and the United States, a different form of a three-block world couldn't be discussed, to say, okay, you guys are hegemon in your hemisphere, you be the guarantor of peace there, and, you know, Russia will be the power dominating the Western Eurasian continent, Europe and Eastern Europe, and China is the hegemon in East Asia. And so there you have, again, three blocks. Iran is kind of being...
You were on the Zoom call this Sunday with Daniel Escalation. Were you there?
No, I missed that one.
Oh, he was talking about five, but it was one of those ones where it's like listening to Mike Benz, where it comes at you like a fire hose. I don't know if you listen to Mike Benz, but
yeah. A lot of information. It's hard to
a huge amount of information. My brain just cramps right up when I listen to Mike talk. And once in a while, I ask him something sort of in a DM or something. But it's there's even guys. There's a bunch of guys on Twitter and different subjects that I think there's got to be a whole team behind these guys. How can one guy know that much? You know,
right.
I worry that some of these guys are you know, psyops.
Okay, I don't know, but who knows? But what was Daniel talking about, a 5-block world?
He was talking, but it came at me so fast I couldn't quite figure out what the 5 blocks were. I actually have to go back and re-listen to it.
I can think of 4 being, you know, the U.S. region, the eastern part of the Eurasian continent, China, western part of the Eurasian continent, Russia, and then the Middle East under Iranian hegemony, or
well, the other thing that seems to mess up this whole plan is the idea of the BRICS, which seems to really not fit this 3-block model.
Well, actually, I think it might fit into that model in a way, you know, because BRICS is like a roof organization for these countries to discuss security cooperation, trade, all kinds of, but it's loose. It doesn't have
in currency in particular. How to not let the U.S. bully them.
Yes.
in the banking system. So I had about a 2-hour chat with Steve Hanke, who's a currency buff. So he always goes to currency, right? But I said, but the BRICS is not about a currency. It's about shifting alliances, right? These are alliances where they used to be seemingly unambiguously tied to the United States, and all of a sudden they're saying we're no longer hanging out with the United States. And that strikes me as a profound shift in geopolitics.
Yeah. And then, you know, you also had Marco Rubio, of all people, signaling that, yep, unipolar world is over. That's done over. We have to look into a multipolar world.
So I think Trump is pulling. I think Trump is basically pulling back to the Monroe Doctrine, right? I mean, at some level.
Yeah, in a way, you could say that. You could say that in a way, yes, for sure. And that might actually make sense.
Right. And that's why it's Panama Canal, Greenland, Canada, you know, he's basically defining the U.S. as being the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah,
and
correct.
You know, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I don't think Canada's ever going to become a 51st state. I think that's probably a pipe dream. Greenland could become a protectorate or something, right? That wouldn't shock me. And I think we're just going to go back and take Panama.
Yeah, well, you see, another thing about Greenland, which I wasn't aware of, but Martin Seif mentioned it, and I don't know if you were on that call. He was saying, no, this was a different call on Sunday. So Martin Seif was saying we've had Greenland since 1940s. What's Trump talking about? We have military bases there. We have research and development
So
installations there.
operationally, we already have them.
Yeah,
Operationally,
so he
functionally.
said, for all practical purposes, we already have Greenland. We can do there whatever we want. We could have just quietly
Done
proceeded
it.
to develop it whichever way we chose. There was nothing and nobody to stop us. So why create this whole this whole big mess about it? And I wonder. It seems to me
Well, I
that
think it was to cover up other stuff he was doing. So I think a lot of what he does is designed to distract. So he's like the magician who says, "Look over here," and is doing stuff over there.
exactly.
And so while we're arguing about how stupid it is to try to take over Greenland and Canada, he's getting appointments shoved through, things like that. And in fact, he might have been even providing cover to the Democrats, where he's saying, "Look, here's the deal, dude. You gotta pass my people, but we'll keep it off the front page to the best we can,
Right.
but you got to vote for them, because if you don't,
yeah.
I'm going to make your life miserable." And one thing we know is Trump can make Democrats' lives miserable.
Yeah.
And so I could imagine it was to provide cover for guys like Schiff and stuff to have to not have to look like they signed off on all his appointments.
Yeah. And imagine with the whole evolution of NSA and CIA and FBI and Department of Homeland Security and all the pervasive surveillance. Imagine how much evidence he's now going to be sitting on. And if he gets Kash Patel in there and Tulsi Gabbard in there, the Democrats are fried. I mean,
so the question is he going to use that to blackmail him, or is he going to spill his guts, do you think?
Oh, I think what he's probably going to do is he's going to offer some of them deals to say, shit, we'll go easy on you, or we're gonna let you skate, but you got to turn against the other guys. So they're probably going to use some to go against others, and they probably know who tops the list of the ones that they want to completely squash, and then they'll use other ones as witnesses, or it's not going to be boring.
One of the things Patel's going to find, for example, is in the world of child trafficking, the FBI is where data goes to die, right? And if they decide to spill their guts on that, I think they're shutting down the NGOs and all that stuff. And so they're shutting down all these warehouses where they're taking kids across the border. I think people underestimated Trump at many, many levels, one of which is they underestimated that he has a moral streak in him that people didn't think he had, right? Yeah. So I think they thought he didn't care about anyone but Donald Trump, but he does care. I think he does care about little guys. I think he does care about people.
Yeah. Well, you see, I on my computer, I had for the longest time, for months, I had this tab open because I couldn't quite believe the story about this young woman in Alabama who has one or two young daughters, and who was convicted to a 3.5-year prison term for protesting in New York City in front of a Planned Parenthood office.
Right. I remember that story. Yes, I do.
And they they said that she was guilty of unlawful assembly,
which is such an absurd thing, right?
Yeah, which I'm pretty sure that in the Constitution of the United States, American people have the right of assembly.
Yeah, I
So
think that's true. Yeah.
what exactly is unlawful assembly? And then I tweeted. When I looked at that article, I tweeted. This was in the just first few days of Trump's presidency, and I tweeted, "I hope that Trump will pardon this young woman and let her return to his family." And then boom, I got replies from people that say like he already did. You know,
Really
yeah, he
interesting.
pardoned her, and there's actually a video somewhere floating on the social media of her reunited with her husband and her
Well, the
family.
other thing that has surfaced over the years are people who've stepped forward and said, "Look, Donald Trump was the only guy who helped me when I was in a bind." And he
Right.
didn't do it. He didn't do it for press. He didn't have cameras snapping photos. He just stepped forward and helped.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think they
I
really
heard stories like that.
underestimated that he has a I think he has a moral compass. And they also couldn't have fathomed, I couldn't have fathomed that his anti-fragility is nothing like anything I've ever seen. I've never seen a guy who can take a beating
Yeah.
and look absolutely unfazed. Reminds me of a prize fight I once saw where I think it was Larry Holmes going against a guy named Leotis Martin. And Leotis was done. He was finished. And Larry Holmes was doing these roundhouse punches into Leotis's head, and Leotis wouldn't go down. And I'm going, how can a guy take that kind of a beating? And that's Trump. He just
Yeah.
and it's such a strange thing to watch. And so the Democrats underestimated him every step of the way.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right that he does have a clear moral compass, and that most of the people out there assumed that he doesn't, that he's like an amoral player driven by sheer ambition. I guarantee you, he wouldn't be where he is today if that were the case, because it would have been easy enough for Donald Trump, who was already a billionaire, to simply make campaign contributions to people like Harris and Trump and Clinton and
Right.
all of
Get
these
what he
people,
wanted.
and sit pretty and have everything he wants, spend the whole rest of his life playing golf, have his family set practically forever as part of this, Eastern establishment. And he didn't do that. He went to war with them.
Right.
And I think that, these people are, if I read the history correctly, they are pathologically vindictive, meaning that if you go against them, they will not only get back at you, they will try to wipe out your line. They will try to destroy entirely your family. And so I doubt that he's not aware of that. I doubt that he's not aware of exactly the fight he picked, and he didn't have to pick it. So there's got to be a reason, and I think there's a very fair chance that he did it out of a sense of right and wrong.
So the other interesting thing, which at first when I heard it, it didn't click, but then it didn't take long to click, was this idea that if he had been reelected in 2020, which I believe was unambiguously a rigged election, if he had won, it would have been just more battles. And so the essentially giving the left a chance to, for the next 4 years, show what a pathologically bad bunch of characters they are. It then teed him up to come back with unbelievable firepower. And so I think we came out ahead, him getting knocked out in 2020 and then getting it back in 2024, because he came back ferociously.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
that idea has crossed my mind, actually, because things are much less ambiguous now than they were 4 years ago.
And it would have been just more court cases and stuff, right?
Yes.
But they've wrung all the court cases out. The 4 years that he wasn't president, they used everything they had. So they used up all their ammo, they used up everything. And now he's come back. And what's amazing is his strategy of just carpet bombing his opponents with executive orders. If he had done them more systematically, they would have been able to fight each battle. as it showed up.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
instead, he just dropped so many on them. They were totally disoriented. They didn't even know where to start fighting.
Yeah.
And so that was brilliant strategy. And he had 4 years to ponder that strategy, right?
Yeah. And I'm sure that people he's surrounded with, they thought it through very carefully, which is why exactly, you know, some of the crazy talk that comes out, it gives me pause, because I think they're not saying this because they're silly, because they're stupid, because they don't understand what they're saying. They're telling these stories to some audience. It's a distraction. It's a psyop, you know.
But
They
I think
know.
it's not. I think it's not working though. I think the left is. If I were on the left, I would right now shut up. Right? I would just zip it.
Oh yeah.
And not say anything and just try to stay out of harm's way, because you're not going to have a positive effect and you'll look like an asshole, right? And yet somehow they seem to just keep flailing.
Yes.
And they just look so bad. And so he's really just outgamed him. It's just extraordinary to watch.
Does it concern you, either one of you, with regards to all these executive orders, how now we're going, each new administration relying on the executive orders to get things done? Because that's what Paul Roberts was talking about yesterday. You know, how tariffs used to go through Congress, and now we're not doing any of that. It's all EOs.
Well, at some point, the shoe's going to be on the other foot, right? Hopefully it won't be for a long time. Hopefully, you know, be 4 years of Trump, 8 years of Vance, you know, who knows what, right? And 4 years of someone else even, right? We could have a Republican streak that's pretty good, especially if the Democrats don't figure it out. But yeah, it scares me, because I can't imagine if I was a rabid Trump hater and having to watch what's going on right now. I can't imagine what being on the receiving end of this would be. And although my colleagues, who all lean left of center, they somehow seem resigned to kind of the idea that what he's doing is not completely nuts. So they're not suffering Trump derangement syndrome after the election. I think they realize their own party destroyed their hopes, and that the strategy of beating Donald Trump by putting up a horrific candidate, 2 horrific candidates. And they said, well, as long as Trump is knocked out of there, it's worth it. And then he didn't get knocked out of it, and they realized, my God, that was a pathetic effort. They offered us someone they thought they could win with, instead of offering us someone who they thought would be a good leader. And so, you know, it scares the shit out of me what would have happened if Kamala Harris had gotten elected.
Oh, I agree with that. I think it would be very, very dark 4 years. Very, very dark.
And
I think nuclear war was on the menu.
Well, so I read Annie Jacobson's book, Nuclear War, and her description. I wasn't going to, because it's fiction, but it's not really fiction. It's her interviewing a bunch of generals and stuff and saying what would happen, right? Tell us what would happen in the event of and so she starts with a Korean launch of an ICBM, and she goes second by second. She says, within a second, our computers are whizzing, picking up this flash coming out of North Korea. And then she goes second by second, minute by minute, through the events that would occur. And she makes it sound like it's sort of a preordained protocol. You don't have a choice. It's a protocol that you have to follow. And so it's not someone like Kennedy saying, here, maybe we shouldn't be doing this sort of thing. It's just our next move is this. And that's what the rules say. And the world is destroyed within 78 minutes. And it's an eye-opening book. I wasn't going to read it, but Jeff Sachs said it was a great book. So I said, okay, I will take his word for it.
Did you recommend it?
Yeah, I do. I do.
Okay.
Did you see Tucker Carlson interview Jeff Sachs, and he talked about when he was in the Kremlin, and he's with Yeltsin? Yeltsin gets a call. He leaves the room. he comes back and he says the Russian generals just voted to dissolve the Soviet Union. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I'm going, holy moly, right? Oh my God. What an amazing moment in that boy's history.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's going to be interviewed by Adam Taggart this week, I happen to notice. So I watch Jeff Sachs every chance I get. He's unafraid to fight battles. I bet you don't know this. He was in charge of the committee to figure out where the COVID virus came from.
Yes, I do know.
Yeah, and it turns out, I think he's kind of naive in some sense. I think he defaults to trusting people too easily. And it took him about 9 months to figure out that Daszak and these guys were lying their asses off to him. And I'm going, Jesus Christ, we all knew they were lying their asses off. Come on, Jeff. Yeah, so Jeff was fighting a two-front war, opposing the Ukrainian war, and chasing down the COVID story.
Yeah.
And I sent him an email, and he said, at least we're not university presidents. That was his response. At least we're not university. I'm going, yeah, that really kind of describes the thank God moment.
I went quite into detail. I went quite deeply into his role in the transition, Russian transition in 1990s from.
He blew that, right? He blew that.
Well, no. My starting assumption was that he played a very dirty role. But then as I read more and more about it, I saw that he was trying to play the good role, but he was frustrated at every step of the way. And, he made specific recommendations. He called into the White House. He called to the IMF and the World Bank, and they rebuffed him consistently. The people who were playing the dirty game was David Lipton and Anders Aslund.
The other guy's a total douchebag is McFall,
Yes.
Russian.
Yeah,
What a total douchebag he was. Yeah. But Sachs told the Ruskies that there would be a Marshall Plan like saving of Russia after the wall fell.
Yes, he assumed that there would be.
But he forgot to calculate that without the Soviet Union, we didn't need to cooperate.
Well, you see, he had the experience of advising the government of Bolivia out of their debts, and the government of Poland, and he made recommendations. In case of Bolivia, an 80% debt write-off, and in the case of Poland, a 50% debt write-off. And his recommendations were immediately accepted. And so he assumed that when he made his recommendations for Russia, and he was recommending that the West provide $15 billion a year in financial assistance for Russia to help with the transition, and for there to be at least a 50% debt write-off. And they told him, no, we're not giving them a penny, and we're not writing off any debt. So that's the end of that. And he was absolutely stunned.
Right, and then right. Also, so that's the default to trust that he falls into.
But then, eventually he tried, and then eventually he resigned. He said, okay, I won't have anything to do with this because this is crazy.
Right. So he's got a big heart. One of his peers, I was chatting with one of his peers, and he said he's very territorial. He referred to him as territorial.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't
in the economics world.
I did try to email him at some point, but I don't know if anything reached him because, once I made a transition from the assumption that he was playing a nefarious role to realizing that he really did try everything to play the constructive role, I kind of felt like, well, okay, I'll just write him a little note to say, look, I looked into all this, and you might like to know the conclusion.
You won me over, yeah.
Yeah, but who knows? Probably gets a lot of email. Doesn't matter. Anyway, I think his heart's in the right place, and I think is playing a very, very important role today in the
Right,
world.
right. I agree. And 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 he was the most famous outspoken Ukrainian war critic.
Yes, yes.
But there were a ton of them. When I wrote about it in 2022, I found probably 40 guys who were really trying to get it right, who were really trying to understand what was going on and what had led up to it. I went back and looked at my writing, and the first writings of Putin was around 2014, and I think what probably caught my attention was the Ukrainian the coup. Was it Yanukovych or someone got knocked out of there?
Yeah.
I can't keep all the names straight.
Yeah.
And I started watching Putin, and over the years I had concluded that Putin, although I had no doubt he was tougher than nails, I also concluded that he was the right guy to run Russia.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And as I've said to many people, Trudeau couldn't run Russia, right? Right? You got to be a tough guy. People say he's the richest guy in the world, and I go, show me the money. Because actually, his wife, here's a funny one, his wife had some health problem. He was high up. He wasn't president, but he was high up. And he had to borrow money to pay her medical bills. And I go, that's not the most corrupt sounding guy. I'm not convinced he has grifted as much as a lot of people presume.
No, actually, there's no evidence that he ever took a penny. And there's plenty of evidence that he never did take any money.
You're the first person to say that. You are the first person to agree with me on that, because I just run into nothing but, no, you just can't see it.
No,
and I go, show it to me. Show it to me.
Yeah. They will never be able to show it to him. But actually, no, people in U.S. State Department actually know this. And there's
but they're not going to tell us.
No, they're not. But they do know.
Right.
And there's a woman. There's a woman called Cheryl Tennyson, who used to work in the Soviet Union for many years, and then in Russia, in a total of 30 years. And she was trying to develop, programs of cooperation, business development in Russia, and so forth. And so she met Putin on one occasion. And then she met many people who knew Putin throughout his life, and many other Americans and Westerners who worked with him. And she said, I asked each and every one of them if there was any bribery, anything under the table when they were dealing with Putin. And she says, do you know that not a single one said so? And every single one said, no, it was completely clear. And she has an article somewhere that I read. This is I have a whole chapter in my book, Grand Deception, which
What is this
got
published?
banned.
This book is this book published?
I published this book in 2017, but it got banned. You can't find it. It got banned twice. But anyway,
because it was pro-Putin.
Well, I don't know. I kind of wrote the case as true as I could find.
No, but it put it this way: by our State Department's standards, it was pro-Putin.
Right. Yeah. Well, yes. Anyway, Cheryl Tennyson tells how she told this to some State Department official, and the guy was unfazed, and he said, like, "Oh yeah, nobody's ever been able to prove any corruption charges against Putin. We know that." But nevertheless, the fatwa
They still
in the
accuse
West
him of
is,
it.
"Thou shalt not speak well about Vladimir Putin," and that's that.
Right. And yeah, I think he's the most grounded leader in the world.
Oh yeah.
Well,
For sure, the most successful one by far.
Well, curiously, if you look at the guys who are getting the most guff, it's Putin, Trump, and Orban, and these are the three nationalists, right?
Yeah.
I love Orban. I could be misreading him, but everything I read that he says, I go, this guy's good.
Yeah. Same here. Same here.
Yeah, put it this way: these guys are better than the people we have for the most part.
Alex, do you
Yeah,
have
I
to?
know.
See, nobody complains about Keir Starmer.
Oh, yes, they do. Oh
Well,
my God.
no,
They think he's
not
a
in the mainstream media, not
They
in the
think he's
mainstream media.
those who complain about him think he's protecting pedophile trafficking networks and things like that. They think he's a dark bastard.
Yeah, but nothing near to the way Putin has been demonized for the last 26
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's
Well, oh yeah.
being a
We somehow
pedophile.
don't think we somehow think that Russia has propaganda and we have news.
Right. Yes.
And I look at Russia today and I go, they seem a lot more honest than us. I went against the establishment. Remember the Skripal poisoning story when the Skripal?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, I went against them, so I went out on Twitter and I said these guys are lying their ass off.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
then it sort of went viral. Next thing I knew, I was on doing multiple George Galloway interviews and stuff, and Al Jazeera was calling, and what I said was, look, I don't know who made this shit, but it's trivial organic chemistry. Anyone could make this stuff. And at one point, I actually put the structure of the nerve gas that supposedly was Russian technology as an exam question on one of my graduate level organic synthesis course exams, and said, make it in 3 steps. It was so obviously a 3-step synthesis, and they all got full credit. And then some blogger, so I said design and synthesis. Some blogger went out and he said, Collum had his students make it. And I go, no, I did not do that. They didn't make it. They designed a synthesis of it. It was trivial stuff. And I actually think it might have had an effect on the Porton Downs guys who were, the British, the British chemical weapons guys who ironically were 8 miles from where the Skripals got poisoned, and they finally came out and said, no, you can't say it's Russian technology. And I don't know if I influenced their unwillingness to sign off, realizing that there's at least one organic chemist who's calling bullshit. But any organic chemist would say that. Anyone would look at it and say, oh yeah, this is trivial. But we just make shit up. And our press is so bad now.
Yeah.
They're really terrible.
Alex, you got to wrap up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I gotta jump, but I completely agree. But the whole point is not to explain things how they are. The whole point is to spin a narrative, and it doesn't matter if Dave Collum believes it or not. It believes that, let's say, most of the unsuspecting consumers of the Western narratives believe it. And so when they say Russia bad, then people say like Russia bad.
Oh, the number of Ukrainian flags out there. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And how many dead Ukrainians? What do you think? 700,000 maybe dead Ukrainians?
Yeah.
What I can guarantee you is if the Ukrainians could rewind the clock, they'd never go to war. They would just say, they
never wanted to go to war. We know that for a fact that even 2 weeks before Russian special military operation, they ran polls, and large majority, like greater than 80% of Ukrainian men, when asked, would you defend Ukraine with weapons if Russia invaded, large majority of them said no. So they didn't want this war.
They got thrown.
It was forced on them. Yeah.
And then they got thrown in the back of vans and put on the front and died because they were untrained, right?
Yes.
Now the other story that we hear is all the dead Russians, and I don't think that's true either. Like McGregor was saying, it was about a 6 or 7 to 1 kill ratio in Ukraine, Ukrainians versus Russians. And so we talk about all the dead Russians. I go, no, not compared to the Ukrainians. Ukraine has got to be a mess for the next half a century, right? I mean, Ukraine's really been destroyed, hasn't it? Or is that overstated?
I think it's destroyed. I think it's in an irreversible demographic collapse. I don't see how it goes back. Most of the Ukrainians who are now in Western Europe and in Russia,
they're not coming back.
Millions upon, they're all like, we're never going back. Anyway, I do apologize, but I have to jump at this point.
Alex, where can people find you?
So I'm on Twitter, on X. My handle is @NakedHegi. I publish a personal Substack called Alex Krainer Substack. And for investors and traders, I publish another Substack called iSystem Trend Following. So that's 3 platforms where I'm most active.
Dave?
Under my desk and at David B. Collum on Twitter. And that's pretty much it. Oh, I'm going to upload 2 things. One, I'm going to upload my year in review. Moriarty reached out and said, I'll do the whole thing for you again if you're willing. I said, okay. And then the other thing, I have a family member who just had a stroke. He's a significant other of one of my kids. And I'm going to ask people to donate to a GoFundMe, thinking that if I've never asked for a penny for anything I've ever done. So I've written 1,000 pages minimum, and I've never asked for a penny. And I'm going to ask people to think of this as a Patreon and say, if you would give me money via Patreon, give this guy money, because he's got a long road to hoe.
Do you have a?
I don't have it yet.
Okay.
I'm just saying, if you see it, you'll presumably recognize it and retweet it and that sort of thing, but it's not out yet.
Okay. I'll look for it. And then, but
I'll ping you too. Yeah.
Thank you guys for doing this. And I look forward to continuing to follow your work and more conversations ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you, gents. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for coming, Alex. I wanted to have this chat again.
Great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's a privilege, and until the next time.
Mic drop.
Do we have a Zoom call today?
Mic drop.
A Zoom call today?